It wasn't the first time I had found myself in the midst of a situation like this, but for some reason, this night felt different. I was at a party, sure, but it wasn't the usual kind of celebration you might expect. There was no music blasting from speakers, no flashing lights, or open bar. Instead, it was a dimly lit gathering, quiet enough that you could hear the hum of voices in the background. A group of strangers, all just milling about, each lost in their own thoughts, some laughing, others talking in low murmurs. I didn't want to be there. The kind of people I had met tonight weren't the type I usually gravitated towards, yet I found myself standing there, clutching a glass of cheap wine, staring at the walls, the weight of the evening pressing down on me. People were mingling around, exchanging pleasantries, but I felt like I was stuck in a time capsule, out of place and out of sync with everyone else. There was no loud announcement that I had entered a room, no red carpet rolled out, no fanfare, or even a kind word from anyone. I wasn't here because I was trying to make friends or be part of the crowd. I didn't care much about small talk. It was just me and my thoughts, and maybe that's where the problem started. The room, though small, seemed to carry a certain heaviness. The kind of weight that, if you stopped to notice it, would slowly begin to drag you down until you couldn't move anymore. At least that's how I felt standing there, observing the people around me, feeling a part of their world without ever truly being part of it. The air in the room was thick with unspoken words, and in a crowd of strangers, I suddenly felt like the loneliest person in the world. And then I saw her. No, not the way you might expect. She wasn't the center of attention or the life of the party, as she used to be. Instead, she stood off to the side alone. Her back was turned toward me, and in that moment, it felt like she was a part of the room, a part of that silence, a figure wrapped in isolation, much like myself. I recognized her in that stillness. Avery, my wife. But tonight, she wasn't the woman I knew. She wasn't the vibrant, energetic woman who would light up any room. Instead, she was distant, a ghost in a sea of people, and in that moment, I couldn't help but feel a growing ache in my chest. Something had changed, something I couldn't quite explain. It wasn't the lack of communication. I had long gotten used to that. It wasn't the way we no longer shared the same enthusiasm for life. We had both grown tired of the same routine, the same conversations, the same everything. But tonight felt different. The subtle shift in her posture, the way her head tilted slightly down as she spoke to someone, her eyes avoiding mine as if she couldn't bear to make contact. It all felt like a quiet admission. Something was off. I watched her for a moment longer. Her laugh, once so genuine, now seemed forced. She was talking to someone I didn't recognize, laughing at jokes I couldn't hear, but I saw the way her eyes flickered across the room. They didn't meet mine, not once. I took a deep breath, trying to shake the unease settling in my stomach. I had been living with this growing sense of dread for weeks now, a feeling I couldn't shake no matter how many times I convinced myself it was all in my head. I thought maybe it was just a phase, maybe the stress of life was getting to both of us. But now, standing there, watching her interact with him, I realized that I had been lying to myself. I wasn't just watching a conversation. I was witnessing the slow unraveling of something that had once felt so solid, so real. It was happening in front of me, and I couldn't stop it. I didn't know how to stop it. A shift happened in the crowd. Avery's voice, no longer a murmur, caught my attention. "I have a husband," she said. The words hung in the air like a cold wind. "But I feel so alone." And just like that, the world stopped. I didn't react at first. I wasn't sure if I had heard her right, if the words had truly escaped her lips, but then I saw it. The way she casually glanced over at me, like she wasn't even aware I was standing there, like I didn't matter anymore. There was no apology, no guilt in her eyes, just a quiet indifference that made my heart sink. I don't remember exactly what happened next. My body moved on its own, driven by a mix of disbelief and an overwhelming surge of something sharp, something bitter. I walked over to her slowly, taking in the room around me, every conversation fading into white noise. I stood in front of her, and the crowd, for a brief moment, fell silent. She looked up at me, her expression unreadable. She hadn't expected this, I could tell. She hadn't expected me to hear her words, to confront her in front of everyone. I didn't know what I was going to say, but I felt the words forming in my throat, like a cold truth that had been waiting to break free. And when it came out, it was calm, almost too calm, but it cut deeper than anything I could have imagined. From this moment, I said, my voice steady, "You are." Avery blinked, confusion crossing her face. What? What are you talking about? I wasn't going to explain. I didn't need to. Alone. I added, letting the word hang between us, heavy with finality. Her hand reached for me, her fingers trembling. Wait, I didn't mean it like that. I was just joking. But I didn't want to hear it. The laughter, the excuses, they all felt hollow now. I didn't say another word. I turned and walked away. I don't know what I expected to happen after that. It wasn't like I had planned it, confronting her like that, in front of everyone, letting those words hang in the air. But once they were out, there was no taking them back. I didn't even look back as I walked away. I couldn't. There was nothing left to say, no explanation that could change the way I felt in that moment. The room was silent. I heard her calling my name faintly behind me, her voice barely audible over the noise, but I didn't stop. I needed air. I needed space to think. So, I walked toward the exit, my legs moving faster with each step, the weight of the evening pressing on me harder than I had ever felt before. The door slammed shut behind me, and the cold night air hit my face, cutting through the haze of wine and confusion. But it wasn't the fresh air that cleared my head. It was the anger that surged up inside of me, the one I had buried for so long. How long had I been ignoring the signs? How many nights had I brushed off her indifference, her coldness, thinking it was just a phase? I knew we weren't perfect, but I never thought it would come to this. It wasn't the fact that she had said those words, although that alone was enough to shatter everything. It was the fact that she had said them so casually, as if she didn't care anymore, as if it was nothing more than a passing thought. But for me, it was everything. I leaned against the cold brick wall outside the venue, trying to calm my racing heart. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I pulled it out, seeing her name flash across the screen. I didn't want to pick it up. I didn't want to hear her excuses or her apologies. Not tonight. But something made me press the button, holding the phone to my ear. "Ryan, please listen to me." Avery's voice cracked through the speaker, her tone shaky. "I didn't mean it like that. I was just talking, I was joking. You know how I get when I'm nervous. It wasn't what you think." I closed my eyes, gripping the phone tighter in my hand. The words stung, but not in the way they used to. She didn't understand. She never understood. "You think that's what I care about?" I finally said, my voice quiet, but laced with venom. "You think I care about your excuses? You think I care about the way you can just brush me off like I'm nothing?" There was a pause on the other end. I could hear her breathing, slow and uneven, as if she was trying to find the right words, but I didn't give her the chance. From this moment, I continued, feeling the weight of those words once again. "You are alone. I can't keep doing this. I can't keep pretending everything's fine when you're out there with him, when you're saying things like that to your friends. I deserve better than this, Avery. I deserve more." I ended the call before she could say anything else. I didn't want to hear it. Not now. Maybe not ever again. The cold wind hit my face again, and I felt the familiar ache deep in my chest. But it wasn't just heartache. It was something deeper, something more final. This was the moment where everything changed. I looked around the empty street, trying to gather my thoughts, but everything felt like a blur. The streetlights flickered above me, casting long shadows on the pavement, and for a moment, I felt as though I was standing at the edge of a precipice, staring down at the abyss. How had I let it get this far? How had I become the man who stood on the outside of his own life, watching as everything crumbled away? I walked, aimlessly at first, not really caring where I was going. The night seemed endless, and yet, the more I walked, the more I realized how little I knew about who I was anymore. I was just the guy who had been there for her, the one who loved her without question. And she was the woman who couldn't even look me in the eye when she said those words. I thought about going back inside, finding her, and demanding answers. But what would I say? What could she possibly say that would make this right? I already knew the truth, and that truth had torn me apart. The woman I had married wasn't the woman I was standing in front of tonight. The woman I married would never have said something like that, would never have made me feel invisible, like I didn't matter. But I had to face it. Avery was different. She had changed, and for the first time, I wasn't sure I even knew who she was anymore. I wandered through the streets, my mind racing, but no matter where I went, I couldn't escape the feeling that everything I had known was slipping away. my marriage, my trust, my love. All of it felt like it was gone, lost in the fog of my own doubts. Eventually, I found myself outside a small cafe. The warm glow of the windows beckoned me in, but I just stood there for a moment, staring at my reflection in the glass. I hardly recognized myself. Was this who I had become? The man who stood at the edge of his life, waiting for something to happen, waiting for someone to come along and fix what was broken? I didn't have the answers. I didn't know what I was supposed to do next. But one thing was certain, I couldn't go back. Not to her, not to what we had. Something had broken, something irreparable, and there was no fixing it now. I turned away from the cafe and walked into the night, feeling more lost than I ever had before. It was a week before I saw her again. 7 days. And in those days, a strange clarity had taken over my mind. At first, I was filled with anger, confused by what had happened, what she had said, and what I had done. But after a few days of silence, I started to see the situation with a startling sense of calm. I knew, deep down, there was no going back. The words were out in the open now, and they weren't just words. They were a reflection of everything that had gone wrong in our marriage. Everything that had been brewing beneath the surface for months, maybe even years. She had called me countless times after that night, but I didn't pick up. She sent messages too, asking me to talk, to explain, to meet. But I couldn't find it in me to respond. I couldn't find the energy to pretend everything was okay, to pretend that this wasn't the end of something I thought would last forever. By the time I saw her again, it was the last place I ever expected it to happen. At the same cafe where I had stood just a week ago, lost in my thoughts. She was sitting by the window, her eyes glued to her phone. She hadn't noticed me yet, and I debated whether I should just walk in and confront her. But something in me held back. Something told me that I didn't need to rush this moment. I didn't need to force it. I stood outside for a few more moments, watching her. The woman I had once known, the woman I had married, looked so distant, so far away. Her posture, her expression, everything about her screamed that she wasn't the same person who had promised to love me for the rest of our lives. It felt like I was looking at a stranger. And maybe that's exactly what she had become, a stranger. I finally pushed open the door and stepped inside. The little bell above the door chimed, and for a brief moment, the whole cafe seemed to pause. She looked up, her eyes immediately locking onto mine, and I saw a flash of something. Guilt, fear, maybe even hope. But it was quickly gone, replaced by a wall I hadn't seen before. She stood up, pushing her chair back so quickly that it almost tipped over. "Ryan," she said, her voice hesitant. I didn't think you'd come." I didn't respond right away. I just stood there, staring at her, letting the silence between us stretch. For the first time in what felt like forever, I couldn't hear the noise of the world around us. It was just us. Her, standing in front of me, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, her eyes still looking at me like she was trying to figure out what I was going to say. "Why didn't you call me back?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been trying to reach you. You've been ignoring me, and I don't know why." I felt a surge of frustration, but it wasn't like before. It wasn't the anger that had fueled me a week ago. It was the cold realization that I was done. I had been done before I even walked out that night, but now it felt like the last piece of me, the last shred of hope, had finally been stripped away. "Don't act like this is all my fault," I finally said, my voice calm but firm. "You said it yourself. You feel alone. You've been feeling alone for who knows how long. Maybe you were right, Avery. Maybe we've both been pretending for too long." She opened her mouth to speak, but I stopped her. "Don't," I said. "I don't need you to explain it away. I don't need you to tell me that it was just a joke. I don't need you to apologize for something you've already done." Her eyes were filled with tears now, and I could see the pain in them. But I couldn't bring myself to feel sorry for her. Not anymore. Not after everything she had said, everything she had done. "I never wanted to hurt you," she said quietly, but I shook my head. "I know you didn't," I replied, my voice softening slightly, but the words still hung heavy in the air. "But you did. And that's the problem, isn't it? You don't even see it. You don't see how much it's been eating away at me. How I've been trying to hold on to something that wasn't even there anymore. You can't just say something like that and expect me to believe you when you tell me you're sorry." The silence stretched between us again, but this time, it wasn't awkward. It was just a quiet understanding. Neither of us spoke for a long time, both of us aware that there was nothing left to say. Finally, she broke the silence. "So what now?" she asked, her voice fragile. "What do we do?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I took a deep breath and stared at her for a long time, trying to find the right words. But the truth was, there were no more right words. No more promises, no more explanations. "What now?" I repeated, almost to myself. I looked down at the floor for a moment, gathering my thoughts. When I looked up at her again, I knew what I had to say. "We don't do anything, Avery. Not anymore. We've been doing this for far too long, and look where it's gotten us." I could see the understanding in her eyes. She was finally starting to get it, starting to understand that I wasn't angry anymore. I was just done. "I'm sorry," she whispered again. But this time, the words didn't have the same effect on me. They didn't make me feel better. They didn't make me feel like we could fix this. I shook my head. "It's too late." I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew it was over. For good. It wasn't that I had planned for it to end like this. I didn't think I would walk out, not after everything we had shared, everything I thought we had built together. But there was something in that moment, something I hadn't been able to see before. It was like the scales finally fell from my eyes. I had been so consumed with trying to fix everything that I couldn't see that the damage was irreversible. When I walked away from her in that cafe, it wasn't just leaving a conversation behind. It felt like leaving the life I had known, the future I had once envisioned. I didn't look back. I didn't wait for her to call out my name again. I didn't care. I had made up my mind. The truth was too clear now. I wasn't just angry at her. I was angry at myself for letting it go on this long, for not seeing the cracks forming beneath the surface. The days that followed were strange. My phone stayed silent for the most part, except for a few more texts from Avery, pleading, apologizing, explaining. She didn't get it, and that was the part that hurt the most. It wasn't about the mistake anymore. It wasn't about her words or her actions. It was about the fact that I had given everything to a relationship that she hadn't been fully invested in. And now, I was left with the hollow shell of something that once felt real. I didn't respond to her messages. I didn't call her back. I needed space, and for the first time in a long time, I could feel my mind clearing. The fog that had clouded my thoughts for months, maybe even years, was slowly starting to lift. I didn't need her validation. I didn't need her apologies. I just needed to breathe. Days passed in a blur. I worked. I ate. I slept. But through it all, I couldn't stop thinking about the way she had looked at me when I left. The look of confusion, of fear, but also of something else. Regret? Maybe. But I didn't care anymore. The damage had already been done. What we had, if we had ever had anything real, was long gone. It was a Saturday evening when I found myself back in our apartment, standing in the hallway, staring at the door. It was as if I had forgotten how to unlock it. My hand hovered over the doorknob for a long moment, but I didn't move. I wasn't sure what I expected to find on the other side. Would she be waiting for me? Would she have something to say that could change everything? I didn't know. I didn't want to know. In the end, I opened the door, slowly. The apartment was quiet. Too quiet. Avery's things were scattered around. Her shoes by the door, her coat thrown over the couch, her books stacked neatly by the coffee table. But none of it felt like home anymore. None of it felt familiar. It was as if I was walking into the life of a stranger. I walked over to the living room window and stared out at the city below. The sun was setting, casting an orange glow across the skyline. It was beautiful, but the beauty felt distant. Everything felt distant. I hadn't heard from Avery in a couple of days. I knew she was probably waiting for me to reach out, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. I didn't want to talk anymore. I didn't want to beg her to understand, to apologize for things that couldn't be fixed. I had tried, over and over, to hold on to something that had already slipped through my fingers. As I stood there, lost in my thoughts, I heard the sound of the doorbell. It was a sharp, unexpected sound that cut through the silence like a knife. I froze for a moment, my heart racing. Could it be her? Was she here to apologize again? To beg me to come back? I walked to the door, slowly, my steps hesitant. I didn't want to answer it, but something made me turn the handle and open the door. And there she was, Avery, standing on the other side, her eyes red from crying, her hands trembling at her sides. "I know you don't want to talk to me," she said, her voice small, barely above a whisper. "But I can't leave things like this. I can't just walk away from us without trying to fix it. Please, Ryan, please talk to me." I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in days. She looked tired, tired of fighting, tired of pretending. But there was something else there, too. Fear. Fear that she was losing me for good. "I don't think we can fix this, Avery," I said, my voice steady but filled with sadness. "I don't think there's anything left to fix." Her face crumpled at my words, and I could see the pain in her eyes, the desperation. But I didn't feel pity for her. I didn't feel anything other than the quiet certainty that I was done. "I don't want this to be over," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I don't want to lose you." I looked at her for a long time, and for a moment, I wanted to reach out, to hold her, to tell her that it was going to be okay. But then I remembered the silence, the emptiness that had crept into our lives over the past few months. And I realized that no amount of tears or words could change what was already broken. "I'm sorry," I said, and for the first time in a long while, I meant it. But it wasn't the kind of apology she was hoping for. It wasn't the kind that could heal anything. It was the kind of apology you give when you've already let go, when you've already walked away, even if your feet haven't quite left the ground yet. I closed the door softly, leaving her standing there on the other side. And this time, when I turned away, I didn't feel the need to look back. Not anymore. The final break had already happened, and no amount of pleading could undo it. For days after I closed the door on Avery, the silence in our apartment felt like a living thing. It crept through every corner, filling the space where conversations used to flow, where laughter used to echo off the walls. I had never realized how loud silence could be until it consumed me completely. The apartment, once a place of comfort, now felt like a tomb, cold and empty. I went through the motions of everyday life, eating, sleeping, working, but everything was dimmed, muted, as if the brightness had been drained from everything around me. I kept thinking of Avery, of the way she had stood there, pleading for me to listen, for me to come back. But it didn't matter. I knew in my bones that nothing could bring us back to what we had. Nothing could fix the cracks that had been forming for so long. Cracks I had been too blind to see until they had split everything apart. I went out that weekend to get some fresh air. I walked through the city aimlessly, the cold biting at my skin, but somehow, I didn't feel it. I was numb. There were people everywhere, but I felt utterly invisible, like I was a part of the scenery, something just passing through. It was as if I had become another ghost, wandering through the life I used to know. I tried to focus on the noise of the city, the chatter of pedestrians, the rumble of buses, but it all seemed so distant. None of it felt real. At one point, I stopped in front of a cafe, staring at the warm, inviting lights spilling out from the windows. The soft clinking of coffee cups and quiet conversation filtered out into the street. I could hear a couple laughing inside, their words a blur of comfort and familiarity. It made something stir inside of me, something deep and painful. I missed what I used to have, the simplicity of it, the way we would sit in places like this, talking about everything and nothing. I missed the sound of her voice, even the way she would complain about the smallest things. But it was all gone now. The laughter, the comfort, the connection, it was all slipping away, and I was left to watch it fade. I sat down at a bench nearby, trying to gather my thoughts, but it felt impossible. I couldn't escape the image of her face, how she had looked when I closed the door, the desperation in her eyes. The truth was, I was tired. Tired of the games, tired of the pretending, tired of trying to hold on to something that had been dead for far too long. It had been weeks since that night, since I had made the decision to leave her, but the weight of it still lingered. And every time I thought about turning back, about reaching out to her, there was a voice inside me that reminded me why I had walked away in the first place. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I pulled it out, almost reluctant to check it. Another message from Avery. Another attempt to pull me back into the storm. I opened it, almost dreading what I would read. "Can we talk? I don't want to give up on us. Please, just one more chance." The words hit me like a punch in the gut. It was always the same pleading, the same promises. I could almost hear her voice in my head, begging, trying to convince me that we could fix it. But I knew better now. The damage was done. She had already crossed a line, and I had already let her. There was no going back. The more she reached out, the more I pulled away. It wasn't out of malice. It was self-preservation. I stood up from the bench, the weight of the decision settling in my chest, heavier than I expected. I walked down the street, the cold air rushing past me, as if trying to push me forward, away from the past, away from everything I had once known. But I couldn't escape the memories, the questions that lingered in my mind. Why had she said those things? Why had she acted the way she did? Was it something I had missed? Had I been too wrapped up in my own world to notice the cracks in hers? As I wandered through the city, I found myself standing in front of a bookstore I used to visit with Avery. It was small and quaint, tucked away on a quiet street, but it had always felt like a place of refuge for both of us. We would spend hours there, leafing through books, talking about our favorite stories, our dreams for the future. It was one of the few places we both felt truly connected. But now, standing in front of it, I couldn't bring myself to go inside. Everything had changed. Even the things that once felt like home now felt foreign. I turned away from the bookstore, my mind still spinning with questions, with memories of the person I used to love. Was she really gone? Had she ever been the person I thought she was? Or had I been living a lie, clinging to an image of her that never truly existed? I didn't know. But as I walked away, I realized something. I was done searching for answers. The past was behind me, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't fix what had already been broken. I didn't go back to the apartment that night. Instead, I spent the evening at a small bar, drowning my thoughts in whiskey, hoping that maybe, just maybe, the numbness would ease. But as the night wore on, the alcohol didn't dull the pain. It only made everything sharper, more painful. I wasn't escaping anything. I was only prolonging the inevitable. When I finally did return home, the apartment was as quiet as I had left it. The silence greeted me like an old friend, and for a moment, I allowed myself to stand there, just breathing in the stillness. It wasn't peaceful, but it was mine. It was all I had left. I looked at my phone again, the messages from Avery still waiting for me. Another apology, another plea, but I didn't answer. I knew now that some things couldn't be fixed. Some wounds were too deep to heal. I turned off my phone and set it down on the kitchen counter, then walked into the living room, sitting down on the couch. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of everything I had lost, but also the quiet relief that came with knowing it was finally over. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again. The next few days felt like I was trapped in a limbo of my own making. I had walked away, yes, but the truth is, I wasn't entirely free. I kept playing those final moments over and over in my head, the pleading in Avery's eyes, her voice breaking as she begged me to come back. I thought the hardest part was over, but I was wrong. The hardest part was realizing how much I had lost. Not just the love we shared, but the person I had been, the version of myself that had been tied to her for so long. I spent more time than I would like to admit sitting in silence, letting the weight of the reality settle in. I had given everything to that relationship. I had poured my heart into it, ignoring the red flags, convincing myself that everything would work out if I just tried harder. But that night, when I closed the door behind me, I realized that trying harder wasn't enough. Love isn't something you can fix just by willing it into existence. And Avery had proved that to me in the cruelest way possible. Every message, every attempt she made to reach me, felt like a reminder of the life I had once thought I would have. She didn't get it. She couldn't. She was still holding on to something that was long gone, something that I was no longer willing to fight for. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just done. And the more I distanced myself from her, the clearer it became that this was the best choice for me, even if it didn't feel like it at the time. It was Saturday when I decided to leave the apartment again. I couldn't stand being cooped up in the silence anymore. I needed to go somewhere, to do something that would distract me, even if only for a little while. The city was alive, as always, with its noise and chaos, but this time, I welcomed it. It felt like the noise was a part of me now, a part of the void I had been trying to fill with something, anything. I walked for hours, aimlessly, losing myself in the rhythm of the world around me. The crowd wasn't much different from what I had seen before. People rushing to get from one place to another, their lives so busy, so full. But as I looked around, I couldn't help but feel the disconnection. It was like I was a ghost, floating through their world, but never really a part of it. I had become someone else. The person I was before Avery, the one who had his own dreams, his own path. He was still in me, buried beneath everything that had happened. Eventually, I found myself sitting on a bench in a park, watching the sunset slowly melt into the horizon. It was beautiful, in a way that made everything feel more distant. A part of me wanted to feel something, to feel the awe that others felt when they watched the sky change colors, but all I could feel was a quiet numbness. I realized that I was no longer looking for answers. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for anymore. The only thing that mattered now was the fact that I had survived. I had walked away, and somehow, I was still standing. It wasn't until later that night, when I returned to my apartment, that things began to take a different turn. My phone buzzed once again with a message from Avery, but this time, it was different. There was no plea, no apology, no begging. Just a simple, cold statement. I'm moving out. I'm done, too. I stared at the screen, the words flashing in front of me. I wasn't sure what I expected from her. But this was unexpected. It hit me harder than I thought it would. For so long, I had tried to be the one to leave, the one to make the decision, to take control. And now, she had made that decision for me. The strangest thing was, I wasn't relieved. I didn't feel like a weight had been lifted. I felt something else entirely, something that I couldn't quite put into words. I didn't want to admit it, but I was hurt. Even though I had walked away, even though I had made my choice, part of me still held on to the idea of us. I wasn't ready for it to be over, even if I knew it had to be. I read the message again, my eyes tracing the words, trying to find something, some hint of emotion behind them. But there was nothing, just finality. I'm done, too. That was it. She was done. She had moved on without me. And in a strange way, I realized that maybe I had already done the same. But the truth wasn't as simple as that. We didn't just move on, did we? Not completely. Not when there was still so much left unresolved. I could feel the space between us, widening with each passing minute. She had made her decision, and I had made mine. But there was no real closure. No real goodbye. It was just over. And somehow, that made it harder. Because at least when you're fighting, there's still hope. But when both of you just give up, when you both stop trying, it's like a slow, suffocating death. I sat on the edge of the couch, staring at the phone, my hands trembling. I had thought I was ready for this, but when it came down to it, I wasn't. I didn't know what I was supposed to feel. Should I feel relief? Should I feel anger? Or should I just feel numb to it all? I put the phone down and ran my hands through my hair, trying to make sense of it all. But the truth was, I wasn't sure what was next. The future felt uncertain, and the past felt like a blur. All I knew was that I couldn't go back. Not to her. Not to that life. There was no going back to who I had been. And in that moment, I realized that I would have to learn to live with the consequences. There was no turning around. No magic moment where everything would be okay again. The final goodbye had been spoken. And now, all I had was the echo of it, ringing in the silence. The days blurred together in a strange mix of routine and disconnection. I went to work, I went to the gym, and I spent most evenings pacing around my apartment. I had once lived in the warmth of a partnership, the rhythm of two lives intertwined, and now there was nothing. The silence was deafening. I still couldn't quite believe how quickly everything had changed. It felt like a cruel joke, one that I couldn't escape no matter how hard I tried. But what I didn't understand at first was that when you stop fighting for something, you lose more than just the person you thought you were in love with. You lose the person you used to be, the version of yourself who believed in love, in loyalty, in promises. For the first time in a long time, I was left alone with my thoughts, with nothing but the ghosts of memories hanging around me. I found myself going through old photos one evening, scrolling through pictures of better days. Our wedding day, holidays we took together, casual selfies we used to send to each other just because. It was hard to look at them. I couldn't help but wonder when it all went wrong, when we stopped being the couple everyone envied and started becoming two strangers sharing a space. The hardest part was the realization that it wasn't just Avery who had changed. It was me too. Somewhere along the way, I had stopped being the man she married. I had stopped being the man who cared for her deeply, the one who couldn't wait to get home to tell her about his day. It wasn't even about her words anymore. It was about the quiet acceptance of the fact that we both had lost something. Somewhere, we had both checked out, pretending to be present while our hearts wandered away without us even realizing it. The worst part was, I didn't know how we got here. I didn't know where things went so far off course. One evening, when I was staring out my apartment window at the city below, I saw her again. Avery. She was walking down the street, talking to someone I didn't recognize, laughing at something they said. It was strange seeing her like this, like she was moving on while I was still stuck. A bitter twist of jealousy rose in me, but it wasn't about her being happy. It was the fact that I was still standing still, my feet frozen in place, while she kept walking ahead. For a moment, I considered going down there, running after her, asking if she had found the answers that I hadn't. But as quickly as that thought entered my mind, I dismissed it. I couldn't keep chasing something that was already gone. I couldn't keep holding on to a life that didn't exist anymore. The next morning, I woke up early, the weight of everything still pressing on my chest. I had gotten used to waking up alone, used to the quiet that now filled the space where her laughter once echoed. I was getting better at being alone, but the emptiness still lingered. There were mornings where I felt like I was still waiting for her to walk through the door, still waiting for her to apologize, still waiting for something to fix the mess we had made. I grabbed my phone, mindlessly scrolling through messages that had come through over the last few days, when one caught my eye. It was from a mutual friend, someone who had been caught in the middle of our drama more times than I cared to admit. "Avery's leaving," the message read. "She's going to her parents for a while. I think she needs space. You should talk to her." I stared at the message, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach. Space. That was the last thing I wanted to hear. Avery had taken her space, her own time to think about what she wanted, but I knew better now. Space didn't fix broken things. It just gave them time to break even more. And we had already done enough damage for a lifetime. But I couldn't ignore the pang of guilt that hit me. Did I really want her to leave like this? Did I want her to walk away, leaving things unresolved between us? The old me would have tried to fix it. I would have run after her, begged for forgiveness, and convinced myself that we could start fresh. But I wasn't that man anymore. I had stopped believing in fresh starts. I put the phone down and walked over to the window. The city was still waking up, people rushing to get to work, starting their days without even thinking about the things I had been struggling with. And for a moment, I wished I could be one of them. Someone who could just keep moving, keep living without all the emotional baggage. But I wasn't. I was stuck, and no amount of wishing was going to change that. The following days were a blur of restless nights and silent mornings. I stopped responding to Avery's messages altogether, and eventually, she stopped sending them. But the silence felt like a trap, like I was waiting for something I couldn't even name. I kept telling myself that it was over, that I was better off without her. But the emptiness remained, growing bigger with each passing day. I had walked away, but that didn't mean I was free. That didn't mean I could stop thinking about her, about what could have been, about the life I thought we would have had. In my quiet moments, I heard her voice in my head, asking if I was sure, if this was really what I wanted. And part of me wanted to say yes. Part of me wanted to run back to her, to hold her, to make it all right again. But I knew better. In the end, we all have to face the consequences of our choices. We all have to live with the ghosts we leave behind. Avery had her own ghosts to deal with. And so did I. But there was no turning back. There was no undoing the past. All we could do now was live with the silence, with the knowledge that we had made our choices, and there was no more room for regret. And so, I did what I had to do. I let go. Letting go wasn't easy, but it was the only way forward. The finality of it hit me harder than I ever thought it would. But I knew deep down, it was the only way to move on. To move forward, we have to leave the past behind. And that's exactly what I did. Time has a way of healing wounds, but it doesn't do so without leaving its marks. I realized that after the longest few months of my life, I had spent so much time fighting for something that was already gone, struggling against the silence, the emptiness that hung between us. But as weeks passed and I started to focus on rebuilding myself, I realized how much I had lost not just with Avery, but within myself. I had lost who I was in the process of trying to fix something that couldn't be fixed. I was too busy looking backwards to see what was ahead. But slowly, I began to change. I started going to therapy, diving into hobbies I had abandoned, and reconnecting with old friends. I threw myself into my work, not as an escape, but as a way to rediscover the part of me that had been buried. I was learning to be content on my own, to stand tall without needing anyone else to define me. And that was the first step, rediscovering myself. I didn't need anyone else to complete me. I was whole as I was. One evening, a few months after Avery and I had both gone our separate ways, I found myself walking through the city again. But this time, there was a lightness in my step. The sky was painted with hues of orange and pink as the sun set. It was one of those peaceful moments where everything just felt right. I passed the cafe where Avery and I used to go, where we had once spent hours talking about our future. But this time, I didn't feel the sting of loss. I felt free. I stopped at a park bench and sat down, allowing myself to take in the quiet beauty of the moment. A small smile tugged at my lips. I realized how far I had come, how much I had grown. I had faced my fears, confronted my demons, and learned to move forward. I wasn't the same person I was when I first walked out on Avery. I was stronger, more self-aware, and, most importantly, at peace. A few weeks later, I got a message from an old friend, inviting me to a get-together. It had been a while since I had socialized beyond work or therapy, and though the thought of being around people made me hesitant at first, I agreed. What could it hurt? It had been a long time since I had allowed myself to really be around others, and this seemed like a good opportunity to test the waters. The evening was simple, no drama, no pressure, just laughter, shared stories, and an easy camaraderie that felt so natural. It felt like the start of something new, like I was finally learning how to live again, how to laugh without carrying the weight of the past. I even met someone, a woman who shared similar interests and a sense of humor. It wasn't anything serious yet, but there was a spark. For the first time in what felt like forever, I realized I could open myself up to the possibility of something new without fear. Weeks passed, and I began to embrace the idea of new beginnings. The friendship with that woman deepened, and though we were taking things slow, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Hope that there was life beyond the heartbreak, that I could trust again, and that I deserved happiness, too. It wasn't about forgetting Avery. It was about accepting the past and embracing what was ahead. It was about seeing life as a series of opportunities, not as a chain of mistakes or regrets. One morning, as I sat on my balcony with a cup of coffee, I looked out at the city below me, a city I had once felt so disconnected from. But now, I saw it with fresh eyes. I wasn't running from anything anymore. I wasn't stuck in the past. I was living for today, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like the future held something beautiful. I realized that it's not the endings that define us, but the beginnings. Every experience, every heartbreak, and every lesson learned has a way of shaping who we are. The past doesn't have to haunt us forever. It can serve as a guide, a reminder of how far we've come and how much more we have left to live. And as I looked toward the horizon, I knew one thing for certain. I was ready for whatever came next.